They put my name on the casualty board at hour 4. I know because the proctor told me afterward in that flat, factual way the velthari have when they're trying to disguise embarrassment as procedure. She said the monitoring system had flagged my biometric signature as non-responsive at 3 hours, 58 minutes, and 12 seconds into the trial, logged me as a probable fatality, and reallocated my water ration to the remaining active cadets. She said this while looking at me across a table at hour 71, as I finished the last of a protein block I had found sealed in a supply locker on the chamber's lower tier. I told her that was a waste of water, since I hadn't been thirsty. The velthari acclimatization protocol is not designed for comfort. The Academy uses it to cull each intake cohort down to a deployable number. Whatever survives 72 hours in a sealed pressure gradient chamber with declining oxygen, rising heat load, and a monitoring system that tracks heart rate, cortisol markers, and something the velthari call vethpulse, a measure of existential distress broadcast through their secondary nervous system. The chamber is calibrated for velthari physiology. Everything about it is calibrated for velthari physiology. The pressure curve, the heat increments, the oxygen dial, the monitoring probes. I'm not velthari. This fact had been logged at intake. I was in the cohort as an administrative continuation, a human exchange attendee whose enrollment window overlapped with the trial period and whom no one had exempted. The intake registrar had looked at my paperwork, looked at me, and told me I could observe from a monitoring booth. I told her I preferred not to. She made a note somewhere. I went into the chamber with the rest of them. There were 41 velthari cadets. Tall, pale silvered, with those wide lateral eyes that read the room in full peripheral sweep. Most of them were exceptional, top-tested from their regional academies, placed in this cohort after scoring above the 93rd percentile on the pre-entry aptitude sequence. They filed in with the particular silence of people who have been told the odds and have decided to believe they are the exception. The chamber sealed at midnight. I found a corner near the lower ventilation grate where the air came in marginally cooler and slightly richer, set my pack down, and ate half a ration bar. Around me, cadets were establishing positions, checking their gear, running through whatever pre-trial rituals their academies had taught them. There was no talking. The protocol discourages it. I had read the intake documents on the transport over because vethpulse broadcasting is contagious under stress, and the last thing the trial designers wanted was the cohort synchronizing their distress. I wasn't broadcasting anything. I had no vethpulse. I was simply a man sitting near a vent, eating half a ration bar. By hour 6, the heat load had climbed enough that 3 cadets were lying flat. The monitoring system noted them. I watched the ambient temperature readout on the chamber's single visible display and compared it to what I knew from memory. Hotter than a summer deployment in a river valley, cooler than the interior of a vehicle that had been sitting on tarmac in August. Uncomfortable, manageable. I drank from my canteen, the one I had filled before entering, which no one had told me I couldn't bring, and went to sleep. I slept for 4 hours. This is apparently what registered as my death. The monitoring probes detected no veth pulse, no cortisol elevation, no distress signature, and my resting heart rate, which sits at 51, was apparently too low to register as a living organism under the system's calibration parameters. The system noted, subject non-responsive, probable fatality. It moved on. I woke at hour 10, used the lower tier supply locker to charge my light, found the protein block I mentioned, and ate half of it. Then I spent an hour mapping the chamber's ventilation layout by feel and sound, because I had nothing else to do, and because understanding the airflow in an enclosed space is the sort of habit you develop when you've spent enough years in places where the air can kill you. The cadets around me were struggling in the way the protocol intended them to struggle. The oxygen dial had stepped down twice. Several were using the breathing cycles they'd been trained on. The smart ones were conserving movement. A few had clustered together near the chamber's center, which I could have told them was the worst position, farthest from any vent, highest average temperature, but they hadn't asked. At hour 22, a cadet named Velsorith found my corner near the lower grate and sat down without speaking. He was young, maybe 19 in standard years, and his lateral eyes had the dull, fixed quality of someone running his body on reduced reserves. He looked at my canteen. I handed it to him. He drank 2 mouthfuls and handed it back, and I respected him for that. 2 mouthfuls, not more. He sat with me for the next 6 hours. Neither of us talked. By hour 40, 9 cadets had been extracted. The chamber made a soft tone each time the monitoring system triggered a retrieval, a tone I had identified by hour 14 as occurring whenever the Veth pulse reading crossed a threshold the system called critical distress. The tone was soft. It happened 9 times in the first 40 hours, then twice more before hour 50, then 2 more by hour 60. Velsorith was still in his corner by hour 58. I had given him the second half of the protein block at hour 46. He had looked at it for a long time before eating it, with the expression of someone recalculating what they thought they knew about humans. I am used to that expression. The ventilation system had a minor fault in the northwest coupling, a flutter in the intake, barely audible, that meant the cooling efficiency in that quadrant was dropping about 4% per cycle. I found a strip of adhesive thermal tape in the supply locker and fixed it at hour 63 because the flutter was beginning to audibly irritate me and because it was the work of about 90 seconds. I didn't think much about it. The chamber's internal temperature in the northwest quadrant stabilized. 3 cadets who had been moving away from that corner stopped moving. I went back to my spot near the lower grate and waited. At hour 70, Velsorith said, without preamble, "You fixed the coupling." "It was bothering me," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The monitoring system has you listed as dead." I heard. "Since hour 4. "That's about right," I said. I was asleep. He made no response to this. His lateral eyes moved slowly around the chamber. The remaining cadets, the hollow display ticking toward hour 72, the sealed door that would open when the trial concluded. Then back to me. "We had a dormancy study in second-year theory," he said finally. "Humans can enter a low metabolic rest state without triggering the stress response cascade. We covered it in 2 pages. "That sounds about right," I said. "The monitoring system doesn't account for it." "No." He looked at the display again. "Does it bother you, being listed as dead?" I thought about it. The display read 70 hours, 44 minutes, and 9 seconds. The sealed tone would come in 76 minutes. Outside, the proctor would be looking at her board and seeing 28 active cadets and 1 casualty, me, and 1 name, Velsorith, burning yellow for marginal but holding. "Not especially," I said. The sealed tone came at 72 hours exactly. The chamber door opened with the pressure equalization that always sounds in enclosed spaces like a held breath finally let go. Light came in from the corridor, clean, cool, bright. The remaining cadets moved toward it with the careful deliberateness of people who have been rationing their legs for 3 days. I stood up, put on my pack, and walked out. The proctor was waiting in the corridor with 2 medical staff and a data slate. She looked at her slate. She looked at me. She looked at her slate again. I let her work through it. "You were listed as a fatality," she said, at 3 hours, 58 minutes, and 12 seconds. "I was asleep," I said. She processed this. The monitoring system logged no Veth pulse signature, no cortisol elevation, no distress markers. "No," I said. "I wouldn't have those. You have none. Not the way your system reads them." She looked at the slate a final time, then set it flat against her side. The 2 medical staff had moved off to help the cadets coming out behind me. In the corridor, past the proctor's shoulder, I could see a larger display with the cohort status board, 28 green tags, 1 yellow for Velsorith, and 1 red marker, my name, stamped with the seal of the system used for confirmed fatalities. The proctor followed my eyes to the board. She looked at it for a moment. "I'll have that corrected," she said. "Appreciated," I said. She started to turn away, then stopped. The velthari have a particular stillness when they're deciding whether to ask something, a slight gathering of the lateral gaze. She had that stillness. "The ventilation coupling in the northwest quadrant," she said. "It was repaired at hour 63. "Tape in the supply locker," I said. 90 seconds. "That's not part of the protocol." "No," I said, but the flutter was getting on my nerves. She looked at me for a long time, not with hostility, not with the particular alien shock I had come to recognize as the velthari equivalent of a double take. Something more careful than that. the expression of a person rebuilding a category from the ground up. She said nothing else. I found the commissary at the end of the corridor, poured a coffee from the machine by the door, and sat at a table by the window to wait for Velthari. He came out 7 minutes later. I had a second cup ready.